Thank you so much, Niels, man. That was amazing to have you chat with us. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the fact that we are sitting essentially in the same room as you right now. Like, I know it's a virtual thing, obviously, but it's an amazing thing to be able to sit down with you and have a chat with you, and that we've got, like, what is it, 25 people watching this right now, which is pretty awesome. And it's first thing in the morning for us here in Canada, so I mean, as the day ramps on, I'm sure we're going to get some more people joining us, but this is pretty awesome. Oh, we've got Max has joined us. As you see here at the bottom, he's Sebastian Ceron. So can we put the spotlight onto him now there, Justin? Or
he's under what name, sorry?
He's Sebastian Ceron. He just joined.
Oh, I see him. Saw him. Max. Okay, he changed his name. Awesome. Do you want to maybe give us a quick introduction to Max Linden, and then we'll put him in the spotlight?
So Max Ceron is from the CWB. He's been working with the CWB for a number of years now. He's run his own welding businesses as well. He's been in and out of running his own business, 2 times now, I think, if I'm not mistaken. You've sold your business and you're back into it again. Just can't stop. Max has a degree of some sort of metallurgy. I'm not sure what level your degree is. I apologize, but I know you've gone to school for it. And I know it was a tough course. You busted your balls and you walked out of there with a good mark, and you were super happy with yourself because you weren't even too sure where you're going to go with that because of how tough of a course it is. That's like high level stuff. And we are really looking forward to picking your brain about that a little bit, Max, is why we've brought you on board here. We've got the Manitoba Blacksmith Guild has, what are we at now? Like 225 members online. Our community has been growing pretty steadily over the last few years, and everybody that's involved in it is super interested in how all this works. There's so many different levels of metal grading. You know, you got all your carbon steels, your 1080 series. Then you start walking into your other alloys, your 4140s, 5160s, your CRVs and stuff like that. And then you can even step up your game a little bit more and start getting into your stainlesses, which is a whole nother ball game that is out of my park completely. The whole metallurgy thing is really, I know this much about what I don't know right now. So, Max, let's throw it to you, man. Maybe you can give us a bit of a spiel about who you are beyond what I know, because I only know this much about what I don't know. So go ahead, sir.
All right, so can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, audio sounds pretty good.
All right, so I'm Max. I teach at the college here in Regina at South Polytech. I teach fabrication and welding and manufacturing. I went to university actually for philosophy in the beginning, and before I got my red seal in welding, and then I got my red seal in steel fab. And then I got my blue seal, which is more on the theory side for that after the fact. So I'm a 2nd generation steel worker. My dad was a blacksmith and a miner, worked in the mines in South America for many years. So I grew up around steel and the steel business my whole life. My sister's involved in the steel business. We're all kind of a steel working family. So in terms of what you're talking about, being a blacksmith and metallurgy and saying you only know a little bit, in my experience, you probably know a lot more than you think you know. Blacksmiths have a very intuitive sense of what steel is and how it works and how it responds, because you're actually hammering on it, and you learn a lot from just hammering on steel. You learn a lot about the makeup of steel and how it goes together and how it blends, just from how it responds to heat in your hand, really. What happens is I think a lot of blacksmiths maybe just don't know the names or the technical jargon that might be behind what they're doing. But in terms of hands-on and pounding it out, I know that it's really what you're seeing with your eyes and what you're feeling with your hands is metallurgy. That is metallurgy, right? So
Definitely. So you're teaching at the South Tech Polytech, is that what it is?
yeah, it's Saskatchewan Polytech here in Regina. Now, actually, you guys will probably be the first group I've told this. I just found out on Thursday. I just put in my letter of resignation at the college because I got a job being a director at the CWB for the association. So I start that job in January. So I'm moving up to a director position, which, you know, for a kid who was burning rods in a shop when he was 14, I never really thought I'd get this far in this trade. And I know Landon, we've talked about this before. There's so many avenues the steel trades can go. So many directions you don't even know where they can go. And even blacksmithing itself is really coming back strong in industry. People are, you know, respect steel, especially as we go forward with recycling and having to reuse materials. There's nothing more recyclable than metal. You know, we can work with all the plastics in the world we want, but at the end of the day, in 1,000 years, it's still going to be metal. In 10,000 years, it's still going to be metal. And those skills are always going to be important.
Well, congratulations on you stepping up your career. That's an amazing feat, sir.
Well, I'm terrified, but that's okay.
Well, with all due respect, that's you know, you should be. Anybody that's moving into a new position should be terrified because the unknown is a scary thing, right?
Yeah, you bet.
And I mean, that's one of the things that we have to face as blacksmiths is the unknown. There's so many avenues that you run into with blacksmithing that's an unknown. When it comes to steel, especially like you said, when it comes to recycling steel, that's one of the things that blacksmiths like to do the most is upcycling their steel. You know, you find an old leaf spring or an old tractor pin or a shear blade or something like that, and you think to yourself, oh, I can make this work into something cool. I can make a knife out of this. But then you got to step back and you got to go, okay, so what is this steel? What do I do with it to make it work properly? I know the basics of heat treating. You know, you get it nice and hot, you quench it in water, or should I quench it in oil, or should I have something else to quench it in? And that's where you kind of have to step back as a blacksmith and start diving into your metallurgy to understand that all these different metals have different heat treating processes. And there is a lot of information behind that. If you start going into the data sheets for the steel, they've all been dissected to a point where they know their heat treating processes. If you know the exact steel you have, but what do you do if you don't know what steel you have? What can you do, Max?
Well, there's a few different ways to approach steel, especially if you're looking at older steels. If you've got something that's old, it actually shortens the list quite a bit. If you're getting an old leaf spring, or say, like I just acquired a whole bunch of leaf springs out of an old wagon from the 40s, you know you're probably going to be in something of a nickel mix or something that hardened it to increase the spring rate. So it'll be like a 4140 or a 5160, somewhere in that range. When you get new steel, though, what's happening now is that there's really not a lot of ore left on the planet. All the clean ore has been pretty much mined out. Even the one in Newfoundland got shut down this year. There's not enough there now. So almost all the steels you buy commercially now are quite engineered. There's a lot of mixed materials, manganese, aluminums, copper, brasses that are mixed in with the steel to help with the ductility and the malleability of them. And it gets a little tougher to know what you're working with. Now, right off the top, the easiest, simplest way to know what you're working with, something that I get asked for all the time, and it's about the spark test. You know, like the spark test is a very definitive way to know what kind of steel you're working with, but you kind of have to know what you're looking for. And there's a lot of videos online where they'll say, okay, you know, I'm going to lay out 10 different steels and I'm going to, you know, go through them and give them all a grind on a grinder and show you the the sparks, whether it's red or yellow, whether they're long or short, whether they're called sprigs, which are those little bursts of sparks that come off.
Sorry,
So what they don't have.
Sorry, what's it called?
A sprig. The sprig is when a leader, the main spark is called a leader spark. So the leader spark comes out, and then if it bursts, that's called a sprig. And that'll make more sparks coming out of it. So what people don't know is what is actually happening there in the metallurgy world. They work with it. When you hammer on a high carbon steel, it makes a ton of sparks. As you hammer it more, there's less and less sparks. Why is that? Well, what happens is that the lattice of the steel is kind of like it's like a lattice on your garden. It's a mesh of steel that's all intertwined like this, right? Now the carbons live in the gaps. Now a single carbon will make a single spark because carbon burns. If you have carbons grouped together, like in cast iron where it becomes graphite, those carbons now will burst into a variety of sparks. All right? So if you're looking at steel and you hit it with a grinder and you're getting long single sparks, you have a low carbon steel because you're just getting one long spark or a single spark. If you hit something with a grinder and you're getting a variety of sparks or a long spark that's bursting into more sparks and making a tree, it looks kind of like a tree of sparks, you're getting more and more carbon. And if the bursts are large, and sometimes a burst will even fall on the ground and roll around for a little while, that's graphite. That means that you are now past 1.7% carbon, and that is now going to be very hard to work with. When you get to that level of cast iron, 1.7% carbon and up, it gets very difficult to work with, which means that you're probably going to have to mix it down if you want to even work with it at all. So you're going to have to layer it with something else, or you're going to have to butter in some type of softer material to draw the carbon out, or worst comes to worst, you just spend the next 3 hours hammering it and heating it and hammering it and heating it and pounding the sparks out. But with a cast iron with that much carbon, it's not beneficial. Now, in terms of the colors of the sparks will tell you the heat that that steel melts at, okay? So if you look at the rainbow, say the color spectrum of light, each color represents a different frequency of heat. So intuitively as animals, we know red is hot and blue is cold, right? We do our water lines like that. We paint dangerous colors of red. Red is danger. And those colors actually are dead on for the light spectrum. Whereas things go red, so now you get into infrared and into the red spectrum, those colors get hotter. And into the blue, those colors get cooler. Now, when you look at steel and you start to grind it, if it's got a white spark, that means that it won't hold heat well, okay? So that means that the spark won't maintain the heat, so it just burns out really quickly. So things that don't conduct electricity well or won't rust don't spark. Aluminum, no sparks. Stainless steel, no sparks, because they won't hold heat, okay? Now, things that make a long spark, like wrought iron is a soft, happy metal. Very close to what comes out of the ground. So wrought iron is nice to work with. It's malleable. It's ductile. Now, it's got a long red spark. That means that that metal will hold heat a long time. So you grind something and you get long colored sparks, you're going to have a softer metal that holds heat really well, means it's easier to work with. The shorter the sparks get, the harder the material gets, and the harder it is to work with. So if you take a drill bit, hit it on a grinder, you'll get short little white sparks. That's a high carbon tool steel, right? High carbon because it's got short little sparks, lots of sprigs, and it won't hold heat. So then I know the color, the length of the spark, and lots of sprigs. That told me it's a high carbon steel, it's probably been heat treated, and it's got lots of carbon. So you can figure out those three aspects based on whether the color of the spark, the length of the spark, and how many sprigs. That'll tell you the carbon content, the malleability, and the ductility in those three things in one shot.
Beautiful. That was beautiful. Absolutely amazing. I love it.
And then, like in terms of mixing steels, like you know, the Damascus is super popular. It's something that guys always want to go after, is, you know, making Damascus steels. And really, Damascus is a place. It's kind of funny how the history of that. Damascus got its name because Damascus is a place in Europe where they used to be able to find, just out of the ground, this amazing quality iron. And anything now that is considered above a certain level of quality is now just called the Damascus steel, because it mimics the ability of that iron production that was done. This is in the 1300s in Damascus, Italy. Now, in order to create Damascus now, what we try to do is we try to emulate those characteristics, which means it's going to be very hard yet malleable, which means I can bend it. It's got a good spring rate. The spring rate of steel is called a yield elasticity rate, which means that how far can I bend something and it'll bend back. If I go too far, it'll bend and stay there. And in the world of blacksmithing, what happens is if you heat treat something, the stresses in the steel that you don't see will sometimes put a bend in it. Now that's worst case scenario. You quench something and it goes in straight and it comes out crooked. If that happens during your quench, what happened is that you had an uneven level of metals in your mix. So some metals will pull more than others, creating a bend. And that's very hard to correct. Once you got a bend in your blade, getting that bend out generally means reheating it and requenching it, but it keeps wanting to come back. Now, the reason it keeps coming back is because reheating it doesn't change the mix. All you're doing is just heating up the same mix twice. And so that bend is going to want to come back. Ideally, to fix that, you're going to want to overbend, or pre-bend it's called, to the other direction, and then quench it, knowing that it should pull back a 1/4 inch, and try to nail that mix. So you'll be like, I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch in the opposite direction. Now I'll quench, knowing that it's going to pull back, and then it should be straight when I'm done. The other option is to just hammer it straight, but you got to realize that those stresses are still in the blade. Those stresses didn't go anywhere. You just forced the steel straight. And now if you take that blade or whatever tool you made and you hit it off of something harder, you'll actually find that it'll bend again. That bend will keep wanting to come back over and over and over. And that's because the stresses in the steel are due to the improper mix. Really, to get that perfectly straight going forward, you'd have to do another round of heating and forming and try to remix another round to try to get that stress out of the steel and get a better homogeneous mix, it's called, where the steels are mixed cleanly. You know, even with Damascus, you see sometimes that there's wide layers between the colors of the etching. So the wider the layers between the etching, the more likely that blade is to bend. The more layers in between etching, the better that blade will be at keeping its strength. Now, we just know that because we know more layers is better, but why is that better? Well, because the mix gets cleaner. Like making a cake and not blending it well enough. It's not going to bake evenly, right?
It's a common issue that a lot of guys run into when they're making their blades, is that they'll go to quench it and they'll end up with a warp in the blade. The idea of putting a bit of a pre-bend in it isn't something that I've heard of too often before. It's kind of a new idea to me, but to me that makes a lot of sense actually, because that's the welder's mind right there. That's what that is. As a welder, we both know you get something that you're welding up and you don't clamp it down or put any pre-bend into it. You weld it up and you step back and it's a banana. What the heck? Who welded this hockey stick, right?
That's right. And distortion is an issue for all the steel trades, whether you're welding, fabricating, or smithing. Distortion is your enemy. Well, and distortions in steel are very hard to get rid of after the fact.
No, there's a lot of guys that are using welding in their blacksmithing when it comes to Damascus, because in order to obtain a proper Damascus billet, you're layering your different types of steel together. And then when you go to forge weld it, what a lot of the guys like to do is either TIG weld it together or MIG weld, spot welds with some MIG or whatever, get some tack welds on there to hold it together. When you're using your TIG welder to weld the two pieces together, you're essentially correct me on this, I could be wrong, but you're essentially doing the same thing as forge welding at that point. If you just do a straight TIG fuse weld, the two pieces together, no filler material, it's essentially the same thing as forge welding it together, right?
Okay, so yes and no. Okay, so the reason it's yes is because once you get past a certain temperature, welding is welding. It's called fusion. You're fusing steel together, and you're doing it at above a certain temperature. So in that regard, yes, you are creating a homogeneous weld that's fusing two pieces of steel together. Now, why is it not the same? Because of the temperature range. When you are forging, you are staying very well within the critical limits of steel, which are between 800 and about 1500 degrees. Once you are forge welding, you'll notice when you burn the steel, right? You can see when you burnt it. Now, when you burnt it, you're hitting close to 2000 degrees, okay? When you're getting up to that 2000 degree mark, and most forges are built to run around 14 to 1600. So unless you're doing something wrong or this plate's too thin or you have a bad mix or something, it shouldn't burn. But if you are burning it, you've exceeded the capacity for the steel to deal or transmit the heat within it, and so that it actually burns, because anything will burn. You know, if you look at the sun, those are all heavy metals burning, leads, you know, titaniums. Anything will light on fire when it gets hot enough. When you TIG weld, you're TIG welding at about 4,000 to 5,000 degrees. So what happens is that you're actually kind of a shock and awe to steel when you TIG weld. You're heating it up incredibly fast, up to 4,000 degrees, causing the weld, but then you're also letting it cool. Now that's why you need argon. That's why you have to use argon when you use TIG welding, as opposed to forge welding when you can do it out in the open air. Out in the open air at 1600 degrees, it doesn't matter. But TIG welding, you have to envelop it with argon to keep the oxygen away, or else it will burn, because the fire triangle, heat, right, fuel, and oxygen. Well, in TIG welding, I'm removing oxygen, so now I'm allowed to get it up to 5,000 degrees. It won't burn at 5,000 degrees because I got rid of the oxygen. But that does change what's happening in the puddle. TIG welding removes a lot of the things. So I can forge weld, or I can forge a piece of spring steel, and it will maintain a lot of its springiness. You TIG weld spring steel, it is not spring steel anymore. The high heat has worked all the spring out of it. It's just too high. You changed the lattice. The structure is completely different. At that 5,000 degrees, it's now not the same. So if you're going to mix forge welding with TIG welding or MIG welding, even MIG is a little bit colder. MIG is around 2,500 to 3,000 degrees. What's going to happen is that you just need to be aware that where you TIG welded it and where you MIG welded it may have different properties than the rest of the steel because it got a lot hotter. Now, through normalizing, you can try to help that, right? You can now post-forge it, normalize it, let it cool very slowly in a blanket or in a bucket of sand, and that will help the lattices around line up. But the lattice inside the weld is going to be different than the lattice on the material when you weld it. So you got to make sure that you do your best to line those back up, or else it will be a spot. Maybe not necessarily weaker, but it will react differently. That might be a spot that rusts. You look at a blade. Why is that spot rusting? Well, that might have had a MIG weld in it when you did your forge. That's now different, right? There might be a different terms of reaction. It keeps bending on a curve here. Well, that might have been where a TIG weld got pushed in. The steel's a little bit different now, so it'll react to heat differently. So if forging, totally cool to weld the outsides together, to hold the pieces together. That's normal. But just be aware that you might be in your best interest to trim those pieces off, or to make sure they're at the back of the blade or somewhere where it's not important, right?
Perfect. Now, I'm going to kind of spill the beans a little bit of an idea that I've had rolling around in the back of my head here that I haven't talked to anybody about before. But with my metallurgy knowledge that I have, which is, like I said, this much about what I don't know, what would be the possibility of taking, say, a piece of flat bar 1084 and TIG welding into that flat bar of 1084 your own pattern of filament material of, say, 52-100 or something like that, in order to build your own custom Damascus billet. Would that be do you think that's a possibility?
Theoretically, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do that. Now, you would have to do a lot of heating and normalizing, probably a few rounds to get it, the edges to blend. What happens is that the high heat welded edge, it's called the heat affected zone. The heat affected zone is on the edge of the weld in between the cold parent material. So there would have to be a procedure. Off the top of my head, you'd probably have to take the 1085, warm it up to maybe 600 or 700 degrees, then weld on top of the hot material so that there's less of a shock between the weld temperature and the material temperature. Now, if you do that, you should be able to layer it up. It's something we do in welding all the time with cast iron. We'll layer cast iron with mild steel in order to weld it so it doesn't split. So like, the theory, in theory, it should work. I mean, there's really only one way to find out, Landon.
That's right. I'm glad that you've admitted that my theory may possibly work. That makes me happy to know that.
Like I've taken just normal cheap flat bar in my shop and taken 309 stainless. Because 309 stainless, just in case no one knows, if you're ever working with stainless, 309 is the number you're going to want to work with, because 309 stainless is the only stainless caliber that is mixable with mild steel. No other stainless can be mixed with mild steel except 309. So you can take a normal flat bar of mild steel and put 309 on an edge, pound that together. Now you have a stainless steel reinforced blade that'll actually stay together. Now 309 is the only stainless that'll do that. If you want to add stainless steel edges to cheaper steel, if you look at your fridge says that it's all stainless steel, but that's, you don't think it's very good quality stainless steel. That's what they've done. They take crappy mild steel and they just put a layer of 309 over it, keeps the cost down, and then it's still, all the nice stainless things. It doesn't rust, it doesn't oxidize, and all those things, right?
Interesting. What would happen if you were to use 316 versus 309?
If you use 316 and 309, it'll blend, but then if you put it under any stress, it'll crack.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll crack. The lattice structure of 316 is too tight. It won't actually fit the mild steel, so it might hold on, but eventually it'll break off.
Cool. Very cool. I've been playing around with trying to TIG weld stainless steel and copper at work quite a bit. And one of the things that I run into a lot is it hot cracking on me or stress cracking from the weld.
Yeah.
You've definitely opened my eyes to the fact that my problem with that is that I'm trying to put 316 into it, I bet, versus 309.
Yeah, so stainless steels are graded on a sliding scale, starting at 304, 308, 309, 316, 324. As you go higher up the scale, they can't mix down. So 316 can weld 324, 309 can weld all of them, 304 can weld 308. It's kind of a weird scale. But 309, and especially specifically if you want to get into it, it's called 309L, low hydrogen. 309L is the one that's the most combinable with all materials.
Yeah, we've been using 309L in our, you know what, I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about my work, to be honest. I think I might get in trouble for it, but
you're probably welding different types of materials together.
Yeah, we've been using 309 to create a stainless structure blended in with a mild structure, which has been super successful. It's worked very well. So
yeah, 309 is a nice material to work with, and it's quite low cost too. So it's a nice one to practice with or even play with. You can stick weld it, you can MIG weld it, and you can TIG weld it. So whatever you like. The only way you can't weld it is oxy-fuel. You can't use oxy-fuel on stainless.
Right. Now, when it comes to stainless steel and knife making, 309, 316, these are not knife making steels, right?
No, they're not. They're much too soft.
What is it that goes into the stainless steel that makes it a good knife steel?
So all stainless steels are a mixture of iron, because they are still a steel. That's right. People always think that stainless steels are not a steel, but they are still a steel. They're generally up to 50 to 60% steel. Now, the remainder of that, depending on the blend, is going to be either nickel or chromium. Okay, so nickel and chromium have two different aspects. I don't know how technical I could get, but it's basically how the atom sits at rest. So iron sits at rest in a format called BCC, which is body-centered cubic, which means that iron has an ability to be very calm, like an atom. Then you heat it up and it gets excited, and then it'll cool back down to its calm state, which makes it nice to work with, right? So this is called BCC. Heated up, it's FCC. This is excited. So calm, excited, calm. That's what we work with steel. Now, chromium is the same. BCC, calm, excited, calm. And that makes it mix very well with iron. So we mix chrome and iron all the time. We use it for bicycles. We use it for car bumpers. We use it for a lot of things because chrome is pretty, it's shiny, it's hard, it doesn't rust, and it mixes really well with cheap steel. So I can make a big, heavy bumper out of the cheapest steel I can find, put a thin layer of chrome on it, it'll last 100 years, right? So that's a nice mix. Now, nickel is the different guy. Nickel is always excited. It never sits like this. Nickel is an FCC material, and it's always excited. Now, that ability to always be excited increases hardness levels massively. You don't put carbon in stainless, but nickel is like the carbon of stainless. It's the different player. It's the guy that doesn't fit in with the group. Just like carbon doesn't really fit in with iron. That's what makes it stronger, is that it's an odd man out. So as the nickel content goes up in steel, and stainlesses, it gets much, much harder. The number for nickel on the ISTM scale is 4. Okay, so you'll find stainless steels that have the number 4 in them. So either a 400 stainless, so 415, 422, or a 4160, or a 4555, which the CRT, those CRKT blades, Colorado, they're a famous blade company out of the US. I have one of their knives. They use 4550, I believe, stainless. If it's got a 4 in it, it's a high nickel. So they're usually not as shiny. They're almost a little duller looking stainless, but they're going to be incredibly hard. And you can make those, 16 thick, 1/8 thick blades that you can't even bend. Those are going to be the stainlesses that you're going to look for knife making. They're going to want to have a high nickel content.
Taking away from the knife making, I apologize because I know everybody's a knife maker on here, most likely, and not an
I've only ever made one, so I don't know.
Well, you've done artwork, haven't you?
I do some, but I'm not very artistic. I'm much more industrial minded. Like, I'm very technical. You guys can probably tell just talking to me that I'm a very technical guy. So I spend a lot of my time in the technical universe. I work for a lot of companies helping them develop steel procedures and steel mixes and stuff like that. So I tried my first hand at knife making this summer for the first time ever. And I'm going to see if I can find a picture here and share it with you. You guys will probably laugh. But I was happy for my first time. It cut me. And I got told, if you bleed, you did it right.
Yeah, there you go. Everyone's first knife is something to look back on, right? Oh, you're in Regina. There is a host of guys in Regina that run the Saskatchewan blacksmithing chapter that I would highly recommend you get in touch with. Dustin Smalls. He is just north of Regina in Craven. He's got a farm out there that he runs a really nice blacksmithing shop from. He's making wrought iron hammers. He's forge welding wrought iron billets together from old tractor wheels. And then he's forge welding 1045 onto the faces of the hammer. The guy is a machine, and I think you'd really enjoy the guy. I think you guys would kick off really well together.
So we actually do talk, DK Smalls Forge, blacksmithing. He's come down to some of the presentations I do at the college. So through the CWB, normally pre-COVID, I actually get together a group of random people from industry about once a month, and I do presentations and I bring special guests in. And Dustin has come down, and I've sent a few students out to his course that he teaches up in Craven there, and everyone speaks very highly of the things that he does. So, are you guys seeing my crappy pictures of my knife?
No, you know what, Justin, can you let him screen share that?
No, I just put it in the chat. They're just in the
Oh,
chat.
did it chat? Okay.
Yeah, it's in the chat. Oh, I finally downloaded it. It took a little while to download. I'll screen share it.
Yeah,
Oh,
if you want to. Don't laugh too much.
There it is.
Oh, that's awesome, dude.
First try. First try.
For a first try, that is amazing, bud. Well done.
Nice grinds.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I would be very happy with that as my first knife.
I learned some lessons though. I now know about the bottom of the blade where it gets sharpened, that you don't sharpen it all the way to the end. What's the name of that? It's got a name.
Secondary bevel? I'm not sure.
You keep the very bottom of the blade not sharp. And I know that now, so that when you grab the blade, you don't cut your finger.
Oh. Nice.
I learned that. So that's out of an old spring. So I actually built that for a friend of mine. His family farm was getting sold. His father had died, and his family farm was getting sold. They had been the family farm for over 120 years. And so they were clearing up a bunch of the old stuff from the farm, and he was quite sad that they were losing the farm. And he brought me over the spring steel. Yes, the Ricasso, thank you. They had brought me the spring steel from an old wagon they found. And so I made him that blade out of the wagon spring and gifted it back to him as a memory for his father and the farm, so that he could put it up on his wall. And then he's got a little piece of the farm forever now. So
It's awesome.
Very cool. Yeah, I love when you can integrate something personal into the blade. That's really neat. Lando?
Justin, do we have this shared on Facebook right now?
Yeah, it's on the Blacksmith Guild. It's on Forged in Fire fan group, and I think that might be it.
Okay. Niels was just asking for a link to be able to share.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I will do that. But Lando, we need to, we've used up our 45 minutes.
Time to wrap it up. All right. Awesome, Max. Thank you so much, dude. That was amazing.
So I'm going to put my email here in the chat. So if any of you guys have questions, metallurgy-wise or technical-wise in the future, go ahead and ask me. I also do podcasts that are up online and webcasts. I have a full metallurgy video, 4-part series, I think, or 5-part series on metallurgy that's online. So you guys can, if you guys want to check them out.
What's
you guys
the podcast called?
It's the CWB Association podcast. It's on well, it's on everything. It's on Stitcher, Google, Apple.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm listening to it via Stitcher. It's an excellent podcast, chock full of great information. I really enjoyed the one you did with the Seacan gentleman there, Mackenzie. That was great.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thank you, Max. That was awesome. Again, catch Max on YouTube. He's got a CWB channel. He's got awesome information on metallurgy. Email Max is going to have his email posted here if you've got questions for him. Max has been so helpful to me in the past, and I can continue to work with him on an ongoing basis. Feel free to bug him whenever you want, like you said. Check out his podcast. And thank you again, Max.
Awesome. All right, Lando, let's, before we get, oh, am I muted? No. Before we get on to Jaco, let's talk about who's sponsoring this event one more time. Do you want to take that on?
Sure. So what we've got going on for this event, at the end of the event, we're going to unleash a little bit of information on how we're going to do this contest, because we've got some sponsors for the event. We've got Pritchell and Hardy out of British Columbia, Kelowna, that is sponsoring our event. We've got Cindy Bennett from Pritchell and Hardy. She's joined us right now.
Thanks, Cindy.
Sorry, Justin?
Thank you, Cindy.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. And she's been super gracious to donate to the Manitoba Blacksmith Guild a small prize package with some wicked stuff in there, some grinding belts, some powdered steel, and a little bit of swag, some hats.
Yeah.
So look forward to that, because at the end of this, we're going to tell you guys how you can qualify to win some of that material. So thank you very much again to Pritchell and Hardy for sponsoring the event. Another sponsor of the event is Thompson Metals out of British Columbia. They are another awesome sponsor for us, because they have donated to us some steel packages that will also be available to win through our contest at the end of this event. So please stay tuned, because this contest is going to be something really cool. It's nothing that I've really been involved in before, and I don't know too much about other contests like this. I guess some of the podcasts I've listened to have done something similar to this, but not to the extent of what we're doing with prize packages. You guys, these prizes are amazing. I'm really, really stoked with the sponsorship that we've gotten from Pritchell and Hardy, from Thompson Metals. And because of the volume of what we're expecting with our Zoom presentation here, we reached out to the C2 Center for Crafts here in Manitoba, and they've helped out with their Zoom account. They've donated to us the use of their Zoom account. So we've got their Pro Zoom account that we're using. They're helping us out through that. And they've also done another little bit of a sponsorship through us to help us out as well. They've worked with us in the past, and they continue to work with us. Thank you so much to C2 Center for Crafts for helping us out. As always, our hearts go out to you. And thank you to everybody so much who has been a member of the Manitoba Blacksmith Guild, growing this community. This is amazing. I can't believe this. A year ago, I would have never have thought to have been a part of this, a little over a year ago. And look at where we are now. We've got something like 225 members online, something like 60 paid members in the membership right now. By the way, you have to be a paid member in order to compete. If you're not a paid member, go on our Facebook page right now, download the form, fill it out, send us your information. It's $35 for the annual membership. We're going to do more Zoom meetings in the future. This is kind of a preliminary thing to, throw off the year, kickstart the year, because this is the ManIron was our annual event that we planned to do in person, but because of COVID, we're bringing it to you virtual this year. And because of COVID, we plan to do more virtual events, maybe once a month. We'll try to figure that out, but there's going to be more. And in order to access future events, you have to be a member. They are not going to be free events like this one. We decided to step it up and make this a free event for everyone. I don't know where everybody is. You're across the world. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that being said, Justin, if you have anything to add to it.
No, I think you covered it. I just wanted to add that the that form is also on the manitobablacksmiths.ca. That's our website, manitobablacksmiths.ca. You could see pictures of the prizes there as well. And yeah, we're getting just ready for Yako here. So we ready for him?
Well, you know what? Actually, to be honest, if my wife was here, she'd be slapping me upside the head for forgetting something.
Oh.
Justin, thank you, Justin. You have done so much work for us, helping put this together. Thank you.
No problem. We were messaging this week, and Lyndon said something about like, man, you put in a lot of work, but I love organizing stuff like this, organizing events and putting things together and reaching out and talking to people. I like kind of being on the sidelines, a little bit behind. So working with Lyndon is awesome. He kind of like takes that center stage, and I kind of like push the buttons in behind, which is the fun part for me. So nice partnership, man. Thank you.
I'm just a good pretender, dude.